Okay, let me finish this discussion by talking about some of the things he discusses in Being and Nothingness. It's a very long book, but there's a few key points that I want to emphasize out of the text that I think are important. Oh, come on. My cat. All right. So he says, not to choose is to choose, not to choose. That's a point I made earlier. I want to talk about freedom and facticity. That is, so Sartre has this notion of radical freedom. Now, in case you haven't thought about this yet, it seems that the facts of the world certainly get in the way. I mean, I could want to be if I could choose to be an Olympic athlete, there is no way in freaking hell that I'm going to be an Olympic athlete. Well, very, very, very unlikely. Or the president of the United States or something. Because the facts of my situation prohibit me from, I'm way too old to be an Olympic athlete. Or even just pick impossible things like flying through the air like Superman or something. So you can't just choose anything you want to choose. The facts are going to get in the way. How does Sartre deal with this issue? And he's got some pretty clever answers. I don't know if they're totally convincing, but they're clever. He acknowledges that, by the way, nearly all circumstances limit freedom. So the facts are always going to be an issue, like who you are, where you are. His first response is, but the adversity of things doesn't exist unless by us positing ends to be achieved. Things are adverse or useful only when they are illuminated by some end. And thus our freedom constitutes its own limits. All right, I'll try to put that in regular English here a little bit. This argument is that nothing is getting in your way until you decide that you want to do something. So nothing was preventing me from flying around like Superman until I decided that I wanted to fly around like Superman. And then all of a sudden the facts are getting in the way or anything like that. So there was nothing in the way until I made the choice to try to do that. That's what he's trying to argue here. Things are adverse or useful only illuminated by some end means only when I decided to do something do the facts become useful or opposed to me. And therefore, it's the choice that I made that created the obstacles. Our freedom constitutes its own limits. All right, kind of clever idea there. The second one is the brute in itself makes freedom freedom. Okay, in itself, look, he has this terminology that just means the world of facts. All right, in itself is the facts. So the brute facts makes freedom freedom. Okay. He says, if you could do anything you wanted, there'd be no difference between considering and really choosing. There must be a separate for itself or something separate from the for itself to make a real choice possible. Okay, for itself, again, terminology, that just means your ability to freely choose. That's the freedom you have as a non-inanimate object. That's a double negative, but not being inanimate, you get to choose for yourself, so you're a for itself. Freedom must be separate from and yet united to some end. All right. Or there can be a free for itself only as engaged in a resisting world. Or I think that sentence maybe key to understanding this point. This argument is that there has to be a resisting. The world and the facts and the world has to push back at you to make it a real choice. Otherwise, there'd be no difference between just wishing something. Like, what if anything you wished, anything you thought just came true? That wouldn't, Sartre claims that wouldn't really be choosing at all. To make it a real choice, you have to put in some kind of effort. It might not be a lot, depends on what it is. I mean, if you want to get a glass of water, it's not that much effort, but there's some. Anything you do has to be, it requires effort, resistance from the world to be a real choice at all. Otherwise, it's just like dreaming or something. So, contrary to the idea that the facts are getting in the way, it's like the facts have to get in the way, otherwise it's not a real choice. All right, so that's an interesting point. The last one, I think, might be the most important one in a lot of ways. Success is not important to freedom. He says you can wish whatever you like, of course, but the wish has to be connected to some action for it to really be a choice. He says there's no distinction between intention and action. Freedom of choice is distinct from freedom of obtaining. All right, so here the idea is that, look, success is not important. So if I want to be the president of the United States and I take actions to try to be the president of the United States, whether I succeed or not doesn't matter. If I want to be an Olympic athlete and I go out and train and try to be an Olympic athlete, success is not important. If I'm trying, that's good enough. Success is not important. Okay. Now, I know there's something to be said for this point. I mean, as long as you're trying to achieve your goal, that is something to be applauded. I do have a very big problem with this notion, though, because often you're evaluating in your mind whether you have a chance of success. I mean, I'm not going to go engage in some action that I have no chance of succeeding in. What do you mean success is not important? I mean, to see the ridiculousness of this, think about if you were a prisoner locked up in a prison cell and you're just wishing that you could get out. Well, then that's not freedom because you're not doing anything. But then you find a toothpick and you start trying to, whittle your way out of the jail cell with a toothpick. It's never gonna work. But now you're free because you're taking action. I don't know, I have a hard time endorsing this notion that success is not important. It seems to me that whether or not you can be successful plays a tremendous role in your decision making, and matters. I mean, what do you mean it's not important? I think it's important. All right, I won't go on anymore about that. Sorry, I'm raising some objections, but there's a lot of existentialists around, and I feel like the need to respond to some of the issues that come up in Sartre's philosophy. All right, now, returning now to freedom and responsibility, and this is in Being in Nothingness. This section in Being in Nothingness really highlights how extreme Sartre's view of responsibility is, as I was trying to suggest earlier. Freedom and responsibility. Okay, he says, the for itself, that's you, okay, a person. The for itself is completely responsible for its world. So you're responsible for your world. Everything is gauged in relation to your projects. Everything that happens to me is mine. There are no non-human situations. Every situation represents me. Every situation symbolizes me. I'm entirely responsible for my own world, everything in it. There are no accidents in life. If a war breaks out, again, back to that, if a war breaks out, it's my war, because I could get out of the war by suicide or by desertion. I could run for it, or I could kill myself, then I wouldn't be in the war. But if I decide not to do either of those things, I got to take responsibility for the fact that there's a war. It's my war now. I deserve it because I chose it. There are no innocent victims in war. That's a harsh statement. Notice that. I mean, like I said, he's taking an extreme view here. He says, it makes no sense to ask what my life would have been like without the war. Thus, I am the war. I must embrace it without regrets, and most of all, without excuses. The weight of the world is upon myself alone. Okay, you're starting to get the gist of this. I did not choose to be born. Okay, true. But I am abandoned in the world, and I must take responsibility for everything. He says to refuse to act is still a choice, and suicide is still a way of being in the world. Look, Sartre is really not recommending suicide for sure, but he is pointing out that it's always that's a choice you always have. Sorry, but it's kind of true. I mean, if you don't like the world, you can always leave. I'm not recommending that either, but it is true. You can always get out of. You can always get out. Okay. How I feel about being born, what I think of it, is my decision, and thus I do choose being born. My attitude makes it mine. So I didn't choose to be born, but what that means to me is that makes it mine. It is only an event in relation to my decisions. I am a being whose being is in question, and every event is an opportunity or a chance to do something. The for itself, you, me, is not the foundation of itself, of others, or of the in itself, but it must choose their meaning. All right, this is the key phrase. All right, I know it's a little bit ponderous there. The for itself is not the foundation of itself. That is to say, you did not choose to be born. You're not the foundation of yourself. You did not choose to. It was not up to you whether you exist or not. Of others, I can't choose for you. You can't choose for me. I can't. So I don't have any say in that either. Or of the in itself. That's again the facts, the brute facts of the world. I don't get to choose. What the facts of the world are. But I must choose their meaning. And this is Sartre's primary point here. I don't get to choose any of those things, but I do get to choose what any of those mean. They have no meaning until I give them meaning. And what they mean is completely determined by myself and myself alone. I have to decide what other people mean to me, what my life means to me, what the world means to me. This is entirely up to me. I think that this is the one point where I really have to say I agree with Sartre. And okay, look, being a philosopher, how often have I heard the question, what is the meaning of life? It's the big question, right? I think Sartre's right. That is up to each of us. You have to choose. He says, realizing freedom leads to abandonment and to anguish, which we usually flee in bad faith. Okay, bad faith is the same thing as self-deception was in the essay. He just uses a different term here. So self-deception. So we're left with abandonment and anguish, which we flee in bad faith. So you're all by yourself having to decide what your life means. And it's a tough choice, anguish. And you can't ask anybody to decide that for you unless you flee in self-deception and ignore your freedom and ignore the fact that it is your choice, or don't fully understand that it is your choice, or deceive yourself about the fact that it is your choice. You flee in bad faith. You just do what everybody tells you to do. You just follow what other people say the meaning of everything is. The person that dies with the most shit wins, whatever it is, you know, maybe, or even religious leaders, whoever, whatever society expects of you, you do that. That's bad faith. And he says most people do that because it's too hard to make that decision. That may be true. So as you may have noticed, I have some objections to Sartre, but I also have some agreements. And he is certainly an interesting character. I hope you enjoyed the semester, since this is the last lecture. And be well.